Hi everyone, welcome to the community classroom. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we are going to turn our attention in this response video to the issue of college and university admissions and scholarships. Now, one of the things that keeps coming up in the discussions is this idea that there are limited numbers of college and university seats in the United States, and that there are a limited number of scholarships available, and that some scholarships that have been earmarked for specific groups, African Americans, Black Americans, Native Black Americans, Negroes, American Indigenous Black people, that some of those scholarships that have been earmarked have been instead given to individuals who do not fit under the rubric for the purpose, the original purpose for those scholarships at certain universities and colleges. And actually, the first time that I heard of this in any formal way was it was reported by law professor Lonnie Guinier and Professor Henry Louis Gates, and the discussion has continued on from that. And I know there have been a lot of issues at some institutions. I'm not going to name those institutions, but there have been a lot of issues at some of the Ivy League institutions regarding this conflict, this issue of identity politics, actually. And so, since a problem has been identified, this diminishing resource, or what someone might consider diminishing crumbs, we're going to address some possible solutions, some possible avenues to do some alternative things in the meantime. I do want to point out something before we go any further, and it's the issue of tuition that's related to these scholarships, and the issue of room and board, so the total cost of this package. Some of the institutions, the cost may be about as high as $100,000 per year for tuition, room, and board. So this equals about $400,000 for a 4-year undergraduate college experience. And so that's not for graduate work, that's just for undergrad. I point that out to make note of the fact that in this particular situation, you're not talking about crumbs, and you're talking about a large amount of resources for school. And one of the reasons that this is important to note is that when you're having this discussion about someone is taking something that someone else believes has been earmarked for them, that something is almost $500,000. And the likelihood that someone is going to voluntarily not take $500,000 for school and is instead going to step back and say, the right thing to do would be to allow other people to compete for this $500,000. I'm just going to tell you it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen anytime soon. It's not going to happen anytime in the distant future. So we're going to talk about some other alternatives to this, dealing with this issue. One of the things that is important to note is that in terms of world ranking for colleges and universities, the United States holds the record in terms of the top universities. And the United States holds the record for the majority of colleges and universities in terms of the top tier colleges and universities worldwide. That entire top 10 is occupied by the United States, with universities such as Harvard and Berkeley and Chicago and Michigan and MIT and Stanford. And so because the United States has most of those top tier universities right here, there is a high demand or higher than average demand for those universities. And simply being in the United States increases that demand. And so there is this clamoring for the resources of these top tier institutions. Particularly, if you recall, I talked about the issue of classism. And I talked about the issue of classism in a previous video. And so when individuals are competing in order to elevate themselves and their focus is on class, there's definitely going to be a clamoring related to getting into those top tier schools. And when those institutions are playing identity politics and they don't have a particular allegiance to any particular group, it's going to create some difficulties in terms of being what you consider competitive in those institutions. I do want to note, however, that many institutions are experiencing what are called low enrollments in the United States, or at least that's the way it's been characterized. And so with this assertion of low enrollments, the argument can very well be made that there is a need to reach out across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, in order to get students to come to the universities. And I can't speak to what's going on at every university, but I can tell you that that is the university rhetoric that's going on across the nation. So what we have here up on the screen is our first edition of this. We are going to talk about the option that American Black, African American, Afro-American, American Negro, Indigenous Black people of America. These are some universities that in this first discussion, these are some universities that you might want to consider applying to when you start to look at colleges and universities. And one of the reasons that you might want to do this is that, first of all, they're in Africa. And one of the reasons you might want to do this is because when colleges and universities are admitting classes, one of the things that they look for is this idea of diversity. And diversity is broader than most people think diversity is in terms of college admissions. So let me explain that to you. Colleges and universities are looking for diversity in many ways. So their diversity is diverse. Yes, they do look for diversity in terms of race. They do look for diversity in terms of ethnicity. They also look for diversity in terms of things like geographic location, home country, language, cultural experiences, age. So they look for diversity in a number of ways. And let's say they had, an overabundance of females enrolled, then that would give male applicants a leg up. And if you've got an overabundance of applicants from a particular geographic locale, then if someone is applying outside of there, then it would give them a leg up. They look more attractive because schools, universities, and colleges like to say things like, we have students from every country in the world, or they like to list the different countries where they have students from. And so it's probably very rare that the University of Pretoria or Cape Town or Nairobi or Nigeria or Ghana or the West Indies or St. George University, it's rare that they get students from the United States applying to go to school there full time. Now, I'm not saying that you need to apply to school to go, for the full 4 years. It might be something that you consider doing just for a summer, for a study abroad. And so there are a lot of different options and lots of ways to look at this. But I do want to encourage you to consider the possibility of pursuing education outside of the United States if you do not feel like you have the competitive edge given the increase in migration that's going on, and the increase in migration of individuals who are of a higher socioeconomic status often, and who have prepared for a very long time to occupy those seats at those high-end universities in the United States, and it also at the HBCUs. And so you might want to use the same strategy as a model. Okay, so you can see that this model apparently works. Otherwise, there wouldn't be all of this discrepancy about the fighting over the $500,000 worth of crumbs. Okay, so there are other options out there. And so I just want you to consider some other possibilities. Now, it's never too late to start this planning, and it's never too early. What I would suggest, if you have lots of time, if this is a parent that's listening, if you're a young person in junior high, planning for this by 7th grade would be a great idea. You can also do this if you're a college freshman right now, sophomore, junior. There's nothing stopping you from transferring. Well, I can't say that for sure, but hopefully there's nothing stopping you from transferring for a couple of years. And so you want to start planning for this by 7th grade, and if possible, no later than 10th grade. And by planning in the 7th grade, parents and students can begin to strategize to have their children enrolled in the best academic programs for high school as possible. So it's not just about prestige. It's about enrolling in an academic program that will best facilitate the young person blossoming to their full potential, both academically, so mentally, emotionally, and socially. And so with this environment, the children are more likely to achieve the highest grades possible, and this will make them most appropriately qualified to successfully apply to a number of schools internationally. And so by the 10th grade, that's a good time to make sure that you're moving in the direction of fulfilling whatever application requirements there are at these universities. So I would start checking at the universities pretty early. Now let's address this issue of scholarships and resources. As I said, there are few applicants coming from the United States to attend many of these schools, and particularly Nigeria and Ghana, there are probably not very many at all. And so you really want to strategize in terms of making yourself most competitive in that market, if you will. And so one of the first things you want to do when you start reaching out to these schools is you want to request scholarship information. And I would encourage you to request scholarship information, particularly in South Africa, where they are likely to have programs that are similar to the programs that continental African students are accessing in the United States at universities and colleges, the same programs that Caribbean national students are accessing in the United States. And I would also encourage Caribbean national students to also consider this strategy. The United States does not have to be the end-all be-all in terms of accessing these types of resources. Africa has these resources already readily available also. Okay, so you really want to start thinking about this seriously as migration is occurring around the world. It's being pushed. Migration is being pushed. And with this push for migration, there is a lessening of a focus on corrective operations, correcting past issues, correcting past discrimination or past lack of access. And so there is less of a focus on that and more of a focus on diversity. And for this reason, and because of this sort of fighting for crumbs kind of thing, Poor students who identify themselves as white will probably at some point in time need to also entertain these same options. Otherwise, there will be even more people fighting for fewer crumbs in the United States. Again, you want to start planning for this by 7th grade, 10th grade at the latest, if possible. Now, one of the things you want to focus on when it comes to essays, because often you have to write an essay for college admissions. And so what you want to focus on in your essay is your educational goals, your career goals. You want to make sure that the admission committee understands that you are going to be bringing geographic, ethnic, national diversity to the institution, to the classroom, and to the culture. You want to focus on the ways in which your attendance at this non-Western university is going to enhance your world perspective and assist in building bridges and networks across continents, countries, races, ethnicities, and social classes of people. And so you also want to include, if this is a part of your history, any overcoming of adversity. Okay, so if you were resilient, you somehow, as they say, raise yourself up by your bootstraps, or your family raised themselves up by their bootstraps, you want to make sure that that is a part of your narrative. And another very important thing to do, and this came out as the discussions started happening regarding Lonnie Guinier and Henry Louis Gates' observations, was that Caribbean national students and African national students often participate in a lot of college prep activities. And so I want to encourage you to start doing things like taking practice tests, practice admissions tests, because with standardized testing, there's what is known as the testing effect. And so the more you are exposed to a test, the better you will do upon subsequent test administration. So you will become used to it and your performance will increase. So that's one of the reasons why you want to take some practice admissions tests. You want to take practice achievement tests. So you want to take as many tests on a practice level as you can so that you score as high as possible when you take the real thing. And one of the things that you can just ask the schools about directly is when you're applying for scholarships and you contact the schools, you can ask them about scholarships and tuition remission. Tuition remission is simply a waiving of the school fees. And you can even indicate to them, just in case they're unclear about what you're talking about, you can indicate to them that there is a practice in U.S. academic institutions of providing special consideration for students of African, European, and Asian and island descent. And you can ask, are there similar programs that they have to attract Western students, particularly from the United States? And since a number of the universities are public universities that we're going to be talking about, one of the things I would suggest is that you contact the government agencies in those locales and ask them directly if they have scholarship funds that they have earmarked for the diaspora. And so I would ask them very specifically, have they earmarked some funds for education for the diaspora as part of what is known as a constructive trust? And you can also perhaps contact the different ethnic groups that were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. And so you could contact the ethnic groups such as the Yoruba, the Igbo, the Akan, the Bamileke, and the Wolof, and the Dogon. So, and the Fon. So there are a number of ways to figure out and possibly get some resources. And you have not because you ask not sometimes. And so you definitely want to ask for what it is that you're looking for. And I want to end this on a very positive note. Let's just say, for instance, there are no scholarships. The cost of tuition at these universities is extremely low in US dollars. You can attend college at many of these universities for less than $5,000 a year. And so I will say, though, that in Western Africa, there are limited seats. So they're having the opposite of what's going on in the United States, purportedly. So there's a limited number of seats, which is what is fueling, in many instances, the students who want to attend college there. It's fueling them looking for college opportunities outside of there. But again, remember what I said about the diversity issue. And because you bring diversity to that equation, it makes you competitive in a different way. Okay? Hoping this information was helpful. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care and see you soon.